Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran, to this Presidency press conference. The third Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting has concluded today here in Gandhinagar, which was preceded by the third FCBG meeting, which was held from 14 to 15 July. As per the drill, first Union Honorable Minister would be giving her address, followed by question and answer, and I'll be calling out names, so you can raise your mic after that, hand, and the mic will reach you. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, and is this on? Good evening, and thank you for being here. The third G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting under the Indian Presidency has just ended. It was held, as you all know, between the 17th and 18th, and prior to that, from the 14th itself, the deputies were all engaged in discussions and getting the, communique ready, chair's statement ready. So I thank, first of all, to begin with, the deputies of all the countries who have intensely worked on the details of everything that has been discussed, the deliberations, and as is the practice, these discussions do protract. They go for long hours, but this time in particular, it stretched over a couple of nights, and last night it was extended for a very long time, actually showing, and I'm very happy, showing the interest that the issues that India has put on the table and the details with which everybody was getting into. So I'm very encouraged by the fact that the deputies have spent a lot of time looking at the details. And I therefore take this opportunity to thank all the deputies of all the countries. Now, the meetings were organized under 5 thematic heads. They covered global economy and global health. They covered sustainable finance and infrastructure, international finance architecture, international taxation and financial sector, and financial inclusion. So there were broadly 5 themes under which all the discussions happened. And the Indian presidency received wide support on all the agenda items. And therefore, I begin with big thanks for all the G20 members for having supported us on all our agendas and actually coming up with constructive inputs in strengthening the agenda, in infusing more content into the agenda. And therefore, I thought, in fact, all of us feel that it was one of those meetings which will stay in all our memories for a very long time. The first thing I'd like to, on the agenda-related topics which I'd like to highlight, is discussions happened on global economic outlook, the risks and the macroeconomic implications, and in this, specific attention was given for food and energy insecurity, and also for climate change-related issues. So global economic outlook has these specific issues discussed. Then I move over to talking about the second issue, which had a lot of traction, discussion at the deputies level, discussion among the ministers, was the issue of strengthening multilateral development banks to address the challenges, global challenges of the 21st century. The G20 endorsed the roadmap for implementation of recommendations of the G20 independent review of MDBs and capital adequacy framework. This roadmap will actually unlock more lending resources in the MDBs, and I was glad to have that cleared. Similarly, on the expert group that India had constituted, had submitted its volume 1, the report's volume 1 report was submitted. The members took note of the recommendations and took note of the recommendations made by the expert group in volume 1. And I feel that the recommendations of this group are aimed at making the MDBs capable of addressing trans-boundary challenges and also ensuring fulfillment of development financing mandates. So that is the second issue which got discussed in great detail. There were also very intense discussions on global debt vulnerabilities, which is a significant priority area. It reflected a lot of India's presidency's endeavor to get the voice of the global south onto the table of the G20. So this topic attaining a lot of traction, discussion, concern, and voicing of opinions on how to get over some vexed issues like delays in giving assistance to those distressed countries and so on. So that issue also gained a lot of traction, and I think specifics have been discussed, which was very encouraging. And therefore, the G20 members welcomed the progress achieved on various ongoing debt treatment cases. Between February and today, we know that very many countries whose treatment under the framework and those at least one outside of the framework have all been addressed. And therefore, there was an overall sense of welcome on the progress achieved on the ongoing debt treatment cases. Also, the G20, under this topic of global debt vulnerabilities, the G20 encouraged the efforts of the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. This roundtable is chaired by India, IMF, and the World Bank. So the G20 actually encouraged the efforts of the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable towards strengthening communication among stakeholders and to facilitate effective debt treatment. So that roundtable has received a lot of encouraging words from the members. The next issue which I'll draw your attention to is India presidency had brought onto the table the issue of digital public infrastructure. We are happy that members acknowledged the significant role of DPI in rapidly advancing financial inclusion and productivity gains that we've achieved and therefore transforming the lives of the poor in the country. So ministers and governors, and I'd like to present before you this particular point, ministers and governors commended India's efforts in leveraging the DPIs to accelerate financial inclusion in the last mile. Members also endorsed the G20 policy recommendations for advancing financial inclusion and productivity gains through digital public infrastructure, which has been developed under the India presidency. The policy recommendations which have come out of these can help in guiding the G20 members as well as non-G20 members, so to harness their DPI for their own goals. So the DPI agenda has had a great kind of recognition for India and the achievements and the scaling up which has happened in India. The next issue I go on to is the financial sector issues. Members deliberated on the macro, financial, and regulatory challenges posed by crypto assets ecosystem and on the potential global policy responses which are so required. So when I said financial sector issues, it pertains to the crypto issues. Members welcomed the high-level recommendations of the FSB on crypto asset activities and also the global stablecoin arrangements. Members also discussed the presidency note that India had prepared and noted that it would be an important input towards prioritizing areas of work essential for achieving a comprehensive, cohesive, and coordinated global policy and regulatory framework. So you can see these reports of the FSB, the synthesis report which is going to come, FSB and the IMF, and also the presidency note are all becoming vital inputs for the G20 membership to understand how to go about further on this issue towards arriving at something which is going to be a global policy, and it's also going to be a regulatory framework on which the positions will have to be taken. So I think it has acquired the necessary traction and recognition that, in fact, there were several members who did say it is so good that India has brought this issue on its priority and is working very well on this. I was going to add a bit later that there was also a round table held yesterday discussing the crypto and its implications and the unintended consequences of anything in that area left unregulated and so on. It was a very rich discussion, and there was recognition on that point as well, that the round table actually gave a lot of inputs to think, and many people brought in newer dimensions to that discussion. It was a very enriched discussion. The next one which I'd like to draw your attention is that there was a lot of discussion on climate finance. Members welcomed the recommendations on the mechanisms to support timely and adequate mobilization of resources on climate finance, and the Sustainable Finance Working Group of the G20 has done commendable work on it, and this was recognized by the members also. Another issue was looking at global efforts towards pandemic prevention. Members welcomed the discussion on the framework on economic vulnerabilities and risks arising from pandemics, while taking into account country-specific circumstances. I'll go over to the next item, which again received a lot of traction, a lot of input, a lot of comments, and positive and constructive suggestions, is funding of cities of tomorrow. There was a lot of interest, a lot of constructive suggestions. There was a strong support for the work under the India presidency on prioritizing financing of cities of tomorrow. The principles designed by the Indian presidency will enable cities to develop customized policies that encourage alternative financing sources also. There was an infrastructure investors dialogue on leveraging funding and financing mechanisms and approaches for cities of tomorrow, which was held on the 16th of July. It went into a lot of details. I'm not, in my opening statement, elaborating on it. Then the last point which I would like to draw your attention to is on the tax agenda. Members appreciated the significant progress made in respect to the two-pillar international taxation package. Members also welcomed a plan for additional support and technical assistance for developing countries and discussed the need to ensure that G20 efforts to enhance tax transparency translate into effective outcomes. There was, of course, a high-level tax symposium on combating tax evasion, corruption, money laundering, and so on. The panelists were also from FATF, OECD, and the European Commission for Economy and Finance Minister of Indonesia. Each one, of course, had a lot of pith and substance in the discussion. I'm not getting into it in my opening remarks. We ended up with a rich share summary which reflects the deliberations held during the meeting and conveys wide support that the Indian G20 presidency received for various deliverables envisaged in 2023. It's a document comprising of 26 paragraphs and 2 annexures. So, other than that, there were dinners and cultural events, all of which you would have closely observed. Before I close my opening remarks, I want to underline the fact that I specifically thanked 5 distinct members. There were 5 mentions of thank you from my side. One was for Secretary Yellen, the other was for Minister Al-Jadan, Minister Suzuki-san from Japan, and Minister Shri Mulyani. Each of them have taken a lot of interest personally and helped in coordinating and smooth discussions at the deputies level. I also thanked specifically Governor Bailey, Andrew Bailey from UK, the Central Bank, Bank of England, because of his contribution to the crypto dialogue and the specific and frank inputs that he had given in the course of the last 2 days. I also thanked Minister Giorgetti because on the digital public infrastructure, he had and his entire team had worked together, particularly being a co-chair of the GPFI, the Global Partnership on Financial Inclusion. So, other than this, there was this 2 more mentions where I had specifically taken the names and thanked Minister Liu Kun from China, because we were able to arrive at a consensus because of China's cooperation and willingness to work with the membership for particularly mutually beneficial issues. And lastly, I also specified specific thanks to Minister Chalmers, Jim Chalmers from Australia. And that is for the financing, innovative financing models when you're talking of infrastructure in the infrastructure working group. So with that, I end my opening statement. We're all open to questions.
Thank you, ma'am. We start with Deepshika, Economic Times. Mike, please raise your hand so that she comes to know. Yeah.
Ma'am, on
Switch it on.
Ma'am, in terms of the tangible deliverables that were reached at this meeting, what are those, especially in terms of debt resolution, crypto framework, and also DPI? The agenda that we were pushing and what all we could achieve. If you could elaborate on that. And also, what are the 2 annexures that are there in the chair summary?
So, Ajay,
I suppose I'm audible. Yeah. First of all, what the annexures are, these annexures are the number of documents which were received, and there are large number of documents, and we will be uploading output statement another hour or maybe within the next 2 hours. There's some formatting, etc. is needed, and this drafting went on till about 4 o'clock today. So number of documents received are almost 40 documents were received.
you might be closer.
Then another annexure 1 is the further work which needs to be done. Some of them is flowing from the action plan which was approved in February. Some from these reports is flowing out. So these are the 2 annexures. And your question that whatever the key deliverables, if I can mention, there are several of them. For example, in Paris Agreement, as part of the Paris Agreement, it's not part of the Paris Agreement, it flows from the Paris Agreement. Developed countries decided that they will mobilize $100 billion per year for developing countries in their journey for climate action, transition, etc. And that amount would be reached by 2020. It has not happened till last year. And there's a very definite moment that developed country contributors have said that this year, for the first time, $100 billion would be reached. That's a very significant one is happening, something which has not happened all along. Plus, there's another positive statement which has come in. The next target was that by 2025, another goal will be set. And that has to be with a floor of $100 billion, meaning that it has to be upward of $150 billion. So that also commitment has been made. So this is something for climate finance per se has been indicated. Similar manner, a number of areas where the attempt is that to take the discourse forward. One, that how the balance sheets of each of the MDBs can work better, can be more efficient use of their capital. A very detailed discussion happened during the course of the past 6 months, and a clear roadmap has been identified. And again, the conclusion came in that can unlock, as FM said, that $200 billion of unlock new capital, new lending window can be provided. Then India contributed with this report, co-convened by Professor Summers and Mr. N.K. Singh, and a good discussion happened around that. That led to some more ideas as to how to go about strengthening the MDBs in terms of their financial capacities, and discussions happened. So G20's process, if we say that what are the goal setting, it is not about deliverable in terms of deals. It is about building institutions, taking the discourse forward. So that would be there. Similar manner, if you talk about the crypto assets, and we have been following very closely, FSB came out with 2 reports and the high-level recommendations, and the minister called for that expeditious implementation by all jurisdictions. And these are, one is on backed assets, and the other one is unbacked assets. So there's a clear one came in. Then through India's effort, it was agreed that a synthesis paper and the roadmap will be advanced so that the same is available ahead of the Leaders' Summit. Leaders can also consider when they meet on 10th and 11th or 9th and 10th of September. So that was again, discourse happened, and then India has contributed by organizing that seminar, and also contributed its own note, and it is a presidency note in the sense that we originated that idea. Several other countries contributed, so it has become a significant input around that. There are several others, but we can discuss after. Debt, 2 areas. One, that common framework was decided under Saudi presidency in the year 2020, but there are implementation level challenges. So the minister decided that infrastructure, international financial architecture working group, IFA working group, would be dealing with those policy level issues so as to step up implementation, and the work will start right away in the 4th meeting, which will happen under the Indian presidency itself. Then there were 4 cases ministers had identified in February meeting: Zambia, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Sri Lanka. And with the exception of Ethiopia, there was a forward movement in all of them. For example, you will see it in the outcome document. In case of Zambia, between February and now, an agreement between Official Creditors Committee and Government of Zambia could be reached. Now, next step, of course, is to have a similar kind of an agreement with the private sector. Similar manner, in case of Ghana, Official Credit Committee has been formed, that is working now. In case of Sri Lanka, the assistance from the loan backup assistance extended financing facility from IMF was approved. Plus, there again, the OCC has started functioning, and that is co-chaired by India, Japan, and France. So that was on the debt agenda at the moment.
Parikshit Luthra from CNBC TV 18.
Ma'am, have you seen progress on China's stand as far as debt restructuring goes? Whoever we spoke to here said there can be no effective common framework on debt resolution without China's support. Did China's response seem encouraging to you?
Well, today it appeared encouraging.
Prashant Sahu, Financial Express.
Ma'am, why there is a chair summary instead of a communique? One. The other question is, was there any discussion on CBDC and use of it in settling trades?
I'll leave it to Governor Das to talk on the CBDC. But the chair's statement is because we still don't have a common language on the Russia-Ukraine war. And our position since February has been that we've derived the statement from Bali, the leaders' statements which was arrived at in the summit, and the February Bengaluru statement was the feeder into this one. And that's because also that the language given in Bali Leaders Summit, we don't have the mandate to change that. So it must be left to the leaders during the summit in September to take a call on that. Till before that, we didn't think it was right for us to change the language.
You see, on the CBDCs, there is a perceptible change in thinking. It's now recognized by large number of countries, both G20 members as well as countries which are not members, that CBDC is an important aspect which needs to be looked at more seriously. So in the as a part of the FMCG deliberations, it was recognized, the work done by the various agencies, the BIS, etc., were all taken on board. The experience sharing and the progress in collecting data, collecting, exchange of information, experience sharing, that was also noted. And specifically with regard to cross-border payments, it was also recognized that there is great potential for CBDC to facilitate easier, smoother, and seamless cross-border transactions and cross-border payments rather. And there is need to take this agenda forward. So it's a work in progress, and this process of experience sharing and collating what is happening across the world, where countries are either considering or countries which have already started pilot projects. This whole process of collating information, etc., by the BIS, that will continue. There is IMF is also parallelly working on the macro financial challenges arising out of CBDC, so that will also be factored in. Thank you.
Shishir Sinha, Hindu Business Line.
Ma'am, good evening. Ma'am, earlier RBI has always maintained the stand that there should be ban on the crypto, and now after FSP recommendations on regulation, will India stand be on the regulating the crypto asset or going for the ban? What would be the stand for that?
This is a question for me or for the governor?
Both
Because
of you.
you started with saying what RBI's position was.
So both of you, ma'am.
So our position is in front of you. So sorry.
Shivangi, Reuters.
Hi. My question is with the minister. You mentioned that the bloc discussed food security. In that context, could you talk about, did you get a chance to talk about Russia exiting the Black Sea grain export deal and subsequently striking Ukraine's grain export ports, and any challenges you see that might pose to food security globally?
Well, it is in that context that today several members condemned it, saying this shouldn't have happened. The Black Sea food passing through the Black Sea shouldn't have been stopped or suspended. So yes, to that extent it was brought out.
Rosuke Hanada, Nikkei.
Thank you. As the minister just now emphasized that India emphasized that India can able to amplify the voice of the global south as the G20 presidency. And could you give me much more detailed idea of how that India can play the role in that sense, and how it reflects to the outcome of the this Gandhinagar meeting?
Well, on the point that India was successful, in the sense, I don't want you, I'm using the word successful for want of a better word. We were able to push this agenda of debt distress, particularly among the global south countries, and that a speedy resolution, an effective resolution should happen. And I'm glad from the time we've been talking about this since February, as Secretary Ajay Seth explained, the resolutions are happening quickly, speedily, rather than, slowly as it would be earlier. Where it was waiting for years, now it's moving faster. That is one thing. And second, also on the discussion of debt, the widening of issues as to what exactly are the issues which are going to be discussed. Is it just going to be that country and the country's troubles, or is it also other issues which are contributing to that country's debt distress? So issues which the Global South had raised, particularly in that meeting which Honorable Prime Minister Modi had held, virtually of course, so many countries had voiced their points of view and expected India to take it to the table of the G20. So on debt is one thing. Second, looking at how to prevent pandemics, and for which you need funds to be located somewhere so that countries which are otherwise not heard will get some kind of a relief. So on the pandemic thing. And the third, now that the discussion on the cryptocurrencies are widening, and there is a common understanding that a global understanding is required for regulating crypto assets which are being created, and the implications that it will have on particularly the emerging markets and developing economies. That I thought was a very big point, wherein much before regulations are in place, there are very many small countries which are also now under the impact of unregulated crypto assets. So that is another issue in which we were able to pull through. And this whole discussion about reforming the MDBs and the expert group which was formed by us. And on that, the issues relate to not the usual two agenda of the multilateral development financing institutions. Poverty, shared prosperity continue. Nobody is disrupting or nobody is questioning that. But even with that activity happening for over now 70 years, you still have a lot of countries which require resources. And in that, highlightable two items are climate. For handling climate-related issues, small countries don't have any resources. Developing countries don't have any resources. So the idea of reforming the MDBs was also for those institutions to become nimble and also efficient enough to raise more monies from outside. Expand their balance sheet is what I can just succinctly put before you. Unless they are able to raise those kind of monies, addressing issues related to Global South, particularly on climate, is not going to happen. And because India is talking about digital public infrastructure and the global public goods, you need these institutions to have that kind of extra resource so that they can. So in a way, many of the issues voiced and many of the issues which concern the Global South, I would believe we have at least brought it onto the table for the G20 to discuss.
Ruchi Bhatia, Bloomberg.
Good evening, ma'am. You did say that China's support in debt restructuring today sounded very encouraging. The Chinese finance minister has put out a statement saying that they expect G20, they seek a fair burden sharing in debt talks, and that's something that they've told the G20. I want to understand from you that what's the consensus view of the G20 on multilateral development banks taking haircuts in debt restructuring, and do you think that will affect their lending capability, an argument that has been put before as well?
These are issues which add to the basket of issues on which discussions on debt restructuring will be happening. It's happening now, it will continue to happen, it will happen later. So it is not as if today you have arrived at just the haircut element of it and the others are going to go on. All these issues are part of the round table which IMF and World Bank together with India are discussing, and these are issues on which the stakeholders have been talking, inclusive of the private stakeholders.
Ketan Joshi, CNBC Awaaz.
मैडम, मेरा सवाल आपसे है, खासकर पूरे दिन आर्थिक नीतियों को आपने सबके सामने रखा, लेकिन शाम को भारत का कल्चर, गुजरात का कल्चर, हमारा हैंडीक्राफ्ट और खासकर एक ऐसा फैशन शो किया जो पंच महाभूत से उसके सम्मिलित हो, तो क्या विदेशी मेहमान का प्रतिभाव रहा? अगर कोई एक अनुभव हमसे आप साझा करें।
ये हमारी कल्चर आधारित जो शाम को कार्यक्रम हुआ, उसमें वित्त मंत्रीगण बहुत ही आनंद लिए और व्यक्त भी किए कि बहुत बढ़िया कार्यक्रम जिसमें बहुत सारे विषय जोड़ा गया है, क्योंकि हम साथ बैठ करके हम सब एक मंत्री के वो दूसरे ऐसे करके एक करके हम हमारे तरफ से एक्सप्लेनेशन देते गए जैसे प्रोग्राम चालू हुआ। इसमें ये फैशन शो जो आपने रेफर किया, वो आयोजन निफ्टी के द्वारा हुआ, नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ फैशन टेक्नोलॉजी। सिर्फ एक NIFT नहीं, पूरे भारत देश में 5 और 6 है, वो सब लोग इकट्ठा करके ये फैशन शो। क्यों फैशन शो? एक प्रमुख विषय है कि माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी लाइफ एक मिशन शुरू किए, जिसका ऑब्जेक्टिव ये है कि हम लाइफस्टाइल को चेंज करें एनवायरनमेंट को देखते हुए। आजकल एनवायरनमेंट के कारण बहुत सारे हम जो चीज उपयोग करते हैं वो सस्टेनेबल नहीं है। जब सस्टेनेबल के ऊपर डिस्कशन G20 में इतनी सारी हो रही है, ये मिशन जो माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी एक नड्ज करके लोगों को आगे ले चलने के लिए प्रयोग कर रहे हैं, नडजिंग, जस्ट रिक्वेस्ट देम, आस्क देम टू मूव इन दैट डायरेक्शन, उसमें ये फैशन शो शामिल हो रही है। क्यों? भारतीय कल्चर में सस्टेनेबल मटेरियल को उपयोग करते हुए ड्रेसेस हम उपयोग करते हैं, वो सब आया। और जैसे आपने पंचभूत का रेफरेंस किया है, जल, पृथ्वी, ऐसे आकाश, वायु, इन सब को जोड़ते हुए, क्योंकि हम हर व्यक्ति भी पंच तत्व हमारे अंदर हुई है। सो ये तीसरी, जिसमें वो ड्रेसेस का कलर्स और उसमें जो बनाया गया डिजाइन कलमकारी है, जो हाथ का काम है, पेन का उपयोग करते, कलम को उपयोग करते हुए करते हैं, और उसमें जो इंक जो उपयोग करते हैं वो सब नेचुरल डाइस होते हैं। इसीलिए इसमें बहुत सारे विषय जोड़ा गया, और जब हम बगल में बैठ करके उनको एक्सप्लेन किया, वो एब्सोल्युटली प्लीज्ड थे कि G20 में हम जो चर्चा करें वो उस विषय के ऊपर आपने इस विषय को ले आए। और इससे पहले वॉशिंगटन में जब पिछले बार हम गए थे यही फंड बैंक मीटिंग में, उस समय भी लाइफ के ऊपर उधर भी एक सिंपोजियम हुआ, मतलब लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरनमेंट। हम हमारे वेशभूष और लिविंग का स्टाइल को थोड़ा बदलते जाना आवश्यक है, यही था इसके पीछे।
अरूप रॉय चौधरी, डेक्कन हेरल्ड।
Discussions that have taken place on debt distress since India took over the presidency. How optimistic are you that by the time the leaders summit comes around in September, China will be fully on board as part of a common debt resolution framework? And one question for the governor as well. Sir, as you said, there is understanding, there is agreement among the members that CBDC has great potential when it comes to cross-border payments. However, sir, as you are well aware, not all countries have been so optimistic about the idea of CBDC. India has been very proactive, but even some of the developed economies have not warmed up to the concept of CBDC. So as the presidency, to what extent has India to what extent have you shared your learnings from CBDC with other central banks? One question for you on China and one for the.
But I've already answered it, saying I'm very hopeful.
You see, on CBDCs, you have to remember that it's a new currency, and it will mean a fundamental change in the currency system, in the system of money across the world. It is something which is part of a process. The process has started. These things do take time. Let me give you the example of the UPI. When it was launched in 2016, it was only confined to a few banks. And that time, the number of transactions were just in few thousands. And in 2016, nobody could imagine where UPI transactions have reached today. Per day, it is 300 million transactions per day. That is 30 crore transactions per day. It is unbelievable. I was in the ministry in 2016. We never imagined that this will reach this kind of scale, but it has happened. It's a part of a process. And now UPI is, I think, at the forefront of international efforts for developing fast payment systems, and we are already engaged with several countries. So therefore, on CBDCs, this is a part of a process. A beginning has been made. Going forward, we have to see how it picks up. And I'm quite optimistic that it will pick up as countries realize its potential.
Avinash Agarwal, Asahi Shimbum.
Good evening, ma'am. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, in your opening statement, you refer to various progress made on various issues in this meeting. But, madam, what will you say is the most significant positive outcome of this meeting?
That all countries supported India's presidency and also the participation of all the countries on every one of the agenda issues. So each one was recognized for the rich content. And I'm borrowing these words. Rich content is something which many members said on their own, that we appreciate that India's agendas have all been so rich in their content, and the meetings happened with that kind of intent. So all this put together, rather than any one particular agenda, I would think is a very good atmosphere, and the way in which we've been supported gives a lot of confidence for India, and also makes me feel that the work of the entire team, both from the RBI and from the ministry, have really been recognized. And that is why the participation has been very intense.
Siddharth from the Times of India.
Just one minute.
I just wish to supplement what the finance minister has said. You know, I have been participating in this G20 meetings from 2015 onwards. First, when I was in the ministry, finance ministry, then as the G20 Sherpa, and thereafter as the governor. The level of engagement, the involvement, the enthusiasm, and the active participation of member countries, and their appreciation about the kind of steering that the Indian presidency is providing to entire G20 exercise, in my mind, if I can use the word unprecedented, I will not be wrong. I think there is a total agreement and appreciation of the way the discussions are going forward, and the participation has been very active, very useful, and the willingness to sort of engage and discuss on all issues and try and resolve them.
Siddharth.
Ma'am, I have two questions. On the MDB report, there's a recommendation on new capital, fresh capital. What is the kind of interest and the response from the other countries? Because Secretary Janet Yellen talked about deferring that part and implementing the other aspects of the report. And two, it talks about in that 3 trillion, 2 trillion is to come domestically. Was there some discussion around how countries would generate those $2 trillion of resources by 2030?
Well, on the first one, on the capital infusion, the discussions are happening on the overall report, on the specific recommendations, and also how this is going to find its way and a roadmap. And the roadmap is going to come only prior to the summit. So when the volume 2 comes and the roadmap also sets its clear imprint, then the issue of when this capital infusion, now or later. So till before that, to have an opinion is fine, but the roadmap is, when it comes, is going to complete the report. And it is only then can we start talking about how we want to handle which issue, which one comes first and which comes later, the sequencing about which many countries have spoken. At this stage, of course, everybody has felt that, saying it's all right, now you're talking about the contribution. Is it going to be voluntary? It's not going to be voluntary. What will be the percentage and all that? It's like we've not seen the roadmap yet, but we are talking. So I would think that's where I will place it.
Ajay Mishra, DD News.
Wait, there was a second question.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll leave Ajay to talk about it.
You have to repeat the question for me.
The 2 trillion to be raised from domestic.
I'll request you to hold your these numbers. You are somewhere there, but not exactly. By tomorrow morning or tomorrow forenoon, we'll be uploading the report on the website. Have a look at the report. The numbers are that out of 3 trillion, 1.8 trillion is needed per annum expenditure on climate action related adaptation, mitigation, 1.2 trillion for SDGs. In terms of financing, 2 trillion is supposed to come from domestic resources, and there the role of MDBs is not for financing, but providing right policy advice so that the growth can improve upon and countries can generate their own resources. That leaves a balance of 1 trillion. Out of 1 trillion, 500 is the external private finance, and $500 billion is the private finance, and 500 is the official external financing, of which MDB's portion is additional one, $260 billion, of which 60 is concessional, another 200 is non-concessional IBRD. So have a look at the report. It's a good, cogent, crisp report, and I'm sure you will love reading it.
Ajay Mishra.
मैम, इंडिया G20 प्रेसिडेंसी में जो एजेंडा आइटम्स हैं, सबसे मुश्किल एजेंडा कौन सा रहा जिस पर कंसेंसस बनाने के लिए आपको सबसे ज़्यादा मेहनत करनी पड़ रही है, और उन एजेंडाज में नियर कंसेंसस कहाँ पर आपको दिखाई दे रहा है? थैंक यू।
ये बहुत मुश्किल है कहना, क्योंकि एक विषय से दूसरा भी जुड़ा हुआ है। ऐसा नहीं है कि एक एक साइलो में पड़ा हुआ है, और इश्यू के ऊपर इन प्रिंसिपल सबको सहमति है, मगर उसको कहते हुए क्या भाषा वाली, माने व्हाट विल बी द लैंग्वेज विद विच यू वांट टू से। ये एक्सपर्ट ग्रुप का रिपोर्ट हमने तो प्लेस कर दिया एट दिस स्टेज। जैसे अभी सेक्रेटरी बोल रहे हैं सिद्धार्थ को कि पूरे रिपोर्ट पढ़ लो भैया, नंबर निकालना नहीं है, उधर भी सबको ये मन में आ रहा है कि इतना बढ़िया रिपोर्ट है, संक्षिप्त में है, स्मॉल रिपोर्ट है, मगर उसमें रिच सजेशंस है, हम उसको पढ़ना चाह रहे हैं। सो उस कगार में आने के बाद उनका लाइन और उनका भाषा ये होगा, वी हैव टेकन नोट ऑफ इट। मगर मान लीजिए हम उसमें न अड़े हुए बैठे हैं कि नहीं नहीं, यू शुड से आई अप्रिशिएट इट और आई रिकमेंड इट, हो नहीं सकता है। इसीलिए क्या कठिन है क्या नहीं कठिन है वो विषय नहीं है, भाषा क्या होना चाहिए जिससे सब सहमति बढ़ रहे, फिर भी टाइम सहमति बढ़ना भी बहुत बड़ा विषय है और इसीलिए मैंने शुरुआत में ही कही कि हर विषय के ऊपर हमारे एजेंडा के ऊपर पूरे सहमति और हमारे सपोर्ट भी मिल रहा है आगे ले चलने के लिए.
Karishma Asudani, Business Today.
Ma'am, throughout your discussions with all the key member states that you have, of course, had in the last few days, what is your outlook of the world economy? Because IMF MD also released a statement today saying that higher inflation may need further monetary policy tightening.
That's a concern which all of us share, that higher inflation. In India, the inflation behaves also because of the seasonal changes, monsoon impact, our CPI basket also consisting of certain goods, and so on. The Western inflation also has a different set of parameters, but their concern now in some countries is that it is going to go up. Therefore, will it have an impact on further interest rates? And if it is so, what will happen to growth and so on? Whereas I think from the reports which are coming, Southeast Asian nations have a different set of concerns, particularly if they are commodity exporters. So the issue of inflation is not similarly placed across various jurisdictions. So each had their own concern, but never mind, inflation is a concern.
Parita Patel from Navbharat.
Good evening, ma'am, and good evening to the ministers. My question would be on the crypto assets. As you said that the crypto assets would be under the FCB regulation, so can you share more highlights on how the regulation would be? FSB regulation? FSB, my bad.
Well, at this stage, the reports are expected. The synthesis report has to come, which is IMF and the FSB. And then a discussion based on also the input that we have given from the President's note. Unless the discussions get to some kind of a crystallizing on thoughts, it will be very difficult for me to, guess now as to what kind of regulations they talk about. So we'll have to wait till the next meeting, meaning next summit and post the summit where we go to Marrakesh also, under Indian presidency.
Shailesh Yadav from the ANI.
मैम आपने बोला कि क्रिप्टो पे काफ़ी अच्छी जो है डिस्कशन हुई है आज की कल की मीटिंग में, तो क्या इंडियन प्रेसिडेंसी के दौरान जो है किसी तरह का कॉमन फ्रेमवर्क हम देख सकते हैं इसको क्रिप्टो पे? और दूसरा, आपने जैसे ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी की बात करी है, तो इंडियन इकोनॉमी पर आपका क्या नज़रिया है और G20 कंट्रीज जो हैं इंडियन इकोनॉमी को लेके क्या सोचते हैं?
G20 का कंट्री इंडियन इकोनॉमी के ऊपर यही बोल रहे हैं कि बधाई है, आप तो इतना फास्ट ग्रो कर रहे हैं जब हम सब 1 और 2% के विषय बात कर रहे हैं.
कृति अम्बे इन्फॉर्मिस्ट.
क्रिप्टो को लेके मैम
मैंने क्रिप्टो के लिए बहुत सारे बोल दिए.
कृति.
Hi, ma'am. So the secretary just mentioned that certain implementational level challenges were observed with respect to common debt resolution framework. So would you please throw some light on these challenges? Also, what kind of deliberations were undertaken during the meeting to address these challenges?
Well, these challenges, if I can throw light, each country has its own debt-related challenges. So when IMF looks at giving a resolution, and when the creditors sit as a committee to talk about it, that country's specific challenges will be taken up by them. I may not be in a position to list out a common set of challenges which affect them all. Each country's debt problem has its own profile. So when the creditors sit and when IMF visits, those points are taken up for discussion. And when the Secretary referred to it, it meant that those committees will have to also now look at those specific ground level problems which they have to iron out.
Siddharth Upasni, Moneycontrol. not there.
Not here.
Ankur Mishra, this is the last. Acha, he's-
Yeah, evening, ma'am, evening, Governor. Just a couple of quick questions. One, again, following on crypto, was the view that they should be regulated unanimous, or was there some pushback from some country, even if it's in the minority? Second, was the proposal to include the African Union in the G20 discussed, and if yes, what is the response from the other members? Thanks.
See, where we are on this discussion is happening that till the last year, most of the work happening in the international era was managing risks to the financial sector. Indian presidency brought the focus on macroeconomic risk. It approached IMF. IMF got involved. They came out with a policy paper in the month of February. Most of you would have seen it. It was shared. And some of you had sent me that paper. In fact, before it reached me, one of you had sent that paper to me. So they came out with a good paper. Then happened it that these are two body of works are happening. Financial Stability Board is looking just from risk perspective. There's a risk, manage it. What other spillovers will happen? They were not getting into that. So now both IMF and FSP are working together to come out with a joint paper. They will also coming it out with a way forward. So here again the thinking is that that should be the bare minimum. What the two high-level recommendations have come, that should be bare minimum. But beyond that, any jurisdiction which wants to be more stringent based on its own circumstances should be doing so. But nobody should go below the bare minimum. That is what the broad approach is.
Ankur Mishra.
I'll just on this crypto thing, let me just supplement what Secretary DA said by a few observations. There are two reports. One is the FSB, the other one is the IMF. The BIS. Now, the FSB report is focusing on how to regulate. On regulation, what they have now, proposed is basically information sharing, transparency of data, and, several other steps they are mentioning. FSB report doesn't go into the critical issues of financial stability and other implications. The IMF is dealing with that. The FSB report, very importantly to address your question, also recognizes that individual jurisdictions have their, have the choice to prohibit crypto if they so desire. So the FSB report recognizes that. So far as the BIS report is concerned, I think I refer to IMF. I was basically referring to IMF is also doing the stability aspect. Now, the BIS report is much more forthright. The BIS report recognizes that there could be broadly three approaches: prohibition, regulation, or just allow it without any restrictions. So broadly, there are three approaches which the BIS report focuses. And I would encourage you to read the concluding paragraphs of the BIS report, which reflects, as Secretary DA pointed out, which reflects all that we have been saying for last more than 1 year about the macro financial and the stability implications, the huge risks involved in cryptocurrencies. So just read the concluding paragraph. It reflects what we have been saying for more than a year now. Thank you.
Ankur Mishra, last question.
There was no discussion.
Ma'am, you mentioned about the two-pillar solution. I want to understand how closer we are regarding the multi-nation pact on that. The issues which were around profit sharing, have they been ironed out? And one more question on crypto, because it is widely discussed topic. Please allow me to ask not relating to outcome, but more on the sentiment and the stance. Because at a time when our RBI governor had warned about the risk of cryptocurrencies, many of the countries were embracing it because of the technology and all other aspects. So is there a change in sentiment and the stance from other countries, and there is a wider consensus on that? And third question regarding the retail payment space, many of the countries and including ECB has said on record that they are learning from India on this space. Will this platform also give the opportunity to India to help the countries who may need the expertise?
First of all, what is the sentiment? I want to hear from you.
Ma'am,
a stance of the RBI is known. At that time, what did you say? Other countries were still embracing it, right?
Many of the countries
India's
were in the...
central bank, yeah?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah?
No, if I can just take that question.
I thought you said the last word on it.
I thought.
No, I was only mentioning...
let me, it's all right. You don't have to be defensive. You see, as regards stance, I thought only monetary policy involves a stance of monetary policy. On crypto, you cannot. But on a more serious note, the early enthusiasm among countries about crypto, the belief that it's a great innovation, etc., I think that has been fully addressed in the BIS report. You could just refer to it. And the developments over the last 1 year, the failure of some large crypto exchanges and the investors losing money, etc. So the enthusiasm is now, I mean, I think it's gone. It is completely muted. And everybody realizes that there are huge risks. So there is great amount of caution and concern around cryptocurrencies. So that is the thing. And with regard to the payment systems, UPI, as was mentioned by the finance minister in the beginning, and I also touched upon it, UPI is now recognized as perhaps the, the best and the most advanced payment system in the whole world. Many countries, we are engaged with many countries to sort of develop interlinkage between our payment system and their fast payment system. Singapore, it has happened. UAE, we have signed the the MOU. Discussions are going on with a few other countries. And I mean, we are available. We are sharing our experience with everyone. The BIS is also, constantly in touch with us. They pick up our experience and it is covered in the BIS literature. So therefore, that's how it stands.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. With this, we conclude this presidency press conference. Thank you, ma'am and sirs, and all the media representatives from Gujarat, from Delhi, Mumbai, and all over the world. Thank you.